So it's been a year.
Last March, most of us at Sun Life started working from home.
And we are still here with each other, our families, and our furry friends.
And we are still here for our clients.
We added a new COVID benefit for our critical illness policy.
We helped members who were laid off from their jobs keep their benefits.
We gave our network dentists an allowance for PPE.
And haven't missed a beat with enrollment, signing millions of employees up for benefits virtually.
Most importantly, we helped a lot of people when they needed us most.
And we're not stopping in 2021.
This year, we launched a new absence management offering.
We made our website easier to use.
And we won awards for being a top place to work with a culture that promotes diversity, inclusion, and equity.
So it's been a crazy year, but nothing has stopped us from being your best partner for benefits.
We will keep making life brighter for everyone we work with.
Using more digital connections and more personal connections.
And we will always be here for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, presenting Sun Life's review of the first 100 days of President Biden's administration and its impact on the employee benefits industry. This is such an important topic for our businesses, our clients, and our partners as we look to navigate changes that may impact both our strategies and the way that we execute on those strategies. My name is Dara Herring, and I'm the Director of Client-Focused Solutions within our Stop Loss and Health Business Unit. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to James Slotnick as our presenter today. James is the Head of Government Relations for Sun Life US. He represents Sun Life's interests to elected officials and regulators, and he speaks regularly to audiences across the country about the changing dynamics in Washington and the impacts to the employee benefits industry. James holds a BA from St. Ansem College, an MBA from Suffolk University's Sawyer School of Management, and a JD for Suffolk University's Law School. So we're expecting great things from him today. Before I turn things over to James, a few housekeeping items. We have received some advanced questions, but we encourage you to add your questions to the chat. I will attempt to share as many of them with James as time allows. And this session will be recorded and made available on our website for future reference. We also encourage you to share it with your colleagues that might find it helpful as well. And without further ado, I turn it over to you, James.
Hey, Dara, thank you very much for the kind intro. I'm a little nervous. Dara told me she's only picking the most difficult questions, so let's keep it easy. I haven't been able to talk to many of you since November 4th. We did that day after the election webinar. Didn't have the results on November 4th, but we talked about some of the things that we thought might happen, and here we are, 100 days in. For the Biden administration. For some people, it's probably seemed pretty quick. For other people, it's maybe seemed very long, but we're here. We certainly know what's happened in the first 100 days. And last night, of course, President giving his first joint address to Congress. We have some sense of what he would like to see happen, not only just in the next 100 days, but really throughout the remainder of his term. So there's a lot that we're going to cover this afternoon. As always, as Dara mentioned, the presentation, the recording, they'll all be on our website in a few days. If you have any questions, again, please put them in. And at the end, I'll have all my contact information as well. And you can certainly feel free to reach out to me directly. More good news. For some of you that have seen some of my webinars before, sometimes the kids do come in. They are under the strictest instructions today. For those of you that have kids, my 9 and 7-year-old obsessed with Roblox. That's a whole different conversation that we could have, but they will lose Roblox for 1 week if they enter today. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. Although only time will tell. So the three things that we're going to cover. First, we're going to spend some time on the political dynamics in DC. And I think, yesterday, the president's address, the infrastructure proposal, how the American Rescue Plan was passed, really illustrates that although none of us are political scientists, it's really important that we understand what the majorities mean for both parties and just how difficult it is to pass legislation. And also, when we look at these in a little more detail, we can see sort of what the agenda looks like for the rest of the year, what Democratic leadership might try to move through and the different options that they have. Then we'll focus on the President Biden's agenda for 2021. We'll spend just a minute on the American Rescue Plan, but we're going to spend the bulk of our time there talking about infrastructure. Talk about a word that is going to be used a million times in the next few months: infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. And certainly we'll talk about the different definitions of infrastructure. The president is looking to expand that definition of traditional infrastructure. And we'll talk about the different bills, the tax proposals on the back end of those bills for potentially how some of that might be paid for. And then I know it's my favorite part of the presentation, that third section. We are 558 days away, but who's counting, from November 8th, 2022, the midterms. And we'll talk about the midterms as we go through the presentation, because a lot of the decisions Democrats are going to make around how they want to attempt to move infrastructure forward is around how they're reading the tea leaves for those 2022 midterms. And if Democrats feel like they're going to lose the House or they're going to lose the Senate, they might be more aggressive in 2021 trying to move legislation forward. On the other hand, and we'll discuss the pros and cons of this, Democrats might decide that by being more centrist, that might give them a better opportunity to hold those majorities in 2022. So a lot that we're going to cover in the next 50 minutes or so. We're going to use a little bit of a different format today. I'm a little nervous about it, but I think it's going to make us flow a little better. As I go through the different sections, Darrell's going to come back and ask some questions in between the sections. And of course, we'll have time for questions at the end. So load the questions up because we're going to have time for questions at the end of every section. So we'll start off with the political dynamics in DC. And again, I mean, this is a slide, we've seen a number of times, but I think it's worth underscoring just how slim that majority is for Speaker Pelosi right now. And again, shows the tightrope that she has to walk at the moment. Democrats can only lose 2 votes. They can only lose 2 members of their party, of the caucus, or else they're not going to be able to move legislation right now. That 218 to 212 difference means, again, if 3 Democrats cross the aisle and are willing to vote with Republicans, because of the vacancies that we'd have that 215 tie, and there's not that tiebreaker in the House like there is in the Senate. So it's critical for Speaker Pelosi that she keeps her caucus together in moving in one direction. There's really little margin for error. And again, it's important to keep that in mind when we talk about infrastructure, because we're already starting to see different members of the party asking for different things on the tax side in particular. On the Senate side, as we all know, it's that 50-50 tie. And we've all become, once again, armchair Senate parliamentarians. We're remembering all those rules of budget reconciliation. And the reason, of course, is most legislation in the Senate, 99% of legislation that moves through the Senate is going to need 60 votes, because you're going to need those 60 votes to end debate on legislation. Then you go to that up and down vote. So unless Democrats have legislation that 10 Republicans want to vote on, they're not going to be able to move legislation through the Senate, unless, again, being our armchair Senate parliamentarians, unless budget reconciliation is used. We've already seen, remember, Democrats use budget reconciliation earlier this year. The American Rescue Plan used budget reconciliation. No Republicans voted for that. And that's that pathway that can be used. Not everything can go through budget reconciliation. We're certainly going to focus on employee benefits today, but something like adding justices to the Supreme Court, let's say, that's something that can't go through budget reconciliation, because that doesn't have a direct impact on federal revenue. So again, budget reconciliation can't be used for everything, but if you have items that have a direct impact on federal revenue, generally speaking, they can go through that process. And as we've also seen, maybe the 2 most important Democratic senators right now, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, Senator Sinema from Arizona, 2 moderate Democrats that Leader Schumer needs to keep within the party. They need all 50 votes to be able to move legislation forward. And then on the flip side, you see senators like Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski on the Republican side from Maine and Alaska. They become very powerful as well, because if Leader Schumer maybe loses Murkowski loses Sinema or Manchin on a vote, but can pick up Collins or Murkowski, that becomes important. So the moderates certainly have maybe outsized power right now in the Senate, because we have that 50-50 split. And so if you feel like you've seen the president use executive orders maybe a little bit more often than presidents in the past, you'd be correct. But part of it is because of how difficult it is to move legislation right now. Some of you have seen this chart before. I like to pull it out every 4 years or so. This goes back to President Reagan and shows the executive orders that have been issued in the first year in office. So you can see that the record is President Clinton. President Clinton issued 56 executive orders in his first year in office. President Trump wasn't far behind. And certainly President Obama, President Trump, both of them over their entirety of their terms expanded the use of executive orders. But through today, President Biden has issued 40 executive orders. So he is on pace to become the record holder. That's not a political statement, it's just numbers on the page. He will issue likely more executive orders in his first year in office than any president before him. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but certainly we saw an accelerated pace earlier in his administration, and to be at 40 at this point again probably means he's going to issue more than other presidents before him. Again, right or wrong, that's up for you to decide. But if you feel like President Biden has issued more executive orders than others, you're on the right track. Finally, I do want to give a little bit of some context in terms of where we're going, what the dynamics mean, and then we'll move into the agenda. And again, this slide, we have a lot of animations here, but this slide hopefully gives you a sense of when you think about the infrastructure package that we're going to talk about next and the tax increases that we're going to talk about next, this should be the timing in your mind for when we're going to see things. So if we go back to March 11th, Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan using budget reconciliation. So there's no Republican support. All the items that were finalized through the American Rescue Plan fit into that budget reconciliation definition, and it moves through the House and the Senate. Now, traditionally, budget reconciliation can be used once a fiscal year. So the original thinking was, okay, American Rescue Plan passed, that uses up the 2021 budget reconciliation opportunity. But, and you may have seen this in early April, Leader Schumer went to the Senate parliamentarian and said, hey, would there be a way that Democrats could amend the 2021 budget resolution so that they would potentially have a second budget reconciliation opportunity in fiscal year 2021. So the fiscal year, remember, ends on September 30th. So the original thinking was budget reconciliation already used up for fiscal year 2021. Next opportunity would be October 1st, 2021, which is the beginning of fiscal year 2022. I know it's a lot of moving parts on the numbers here, but Leader Schumer, talking to the Senate parliamentarian, has released to the press saying we're able to use budget reconciliation a second time in fiscal year 2021. And so now the timeline for the infrastructure package, which we're going to get into, all the details in a moment, is the target is early July. And again, this is an aggressive timeline for sure. But what we heard the president talk about last night, the American Families Plan, the American Jobs Act, which he touched on as well. The plan is for the House to pass that by early July, the Senate to pass that before August recess through the budget reconciliation process. So again, if Democrats are marking this up in a perfect world, they're passing using budget reconciliation a second time in fiscal year 2021 and passing the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, the American Tax Plan. Again, we're going to get into all those details in a moment by the end of August. And if they did that, they would actually have another opportunity for budget reconciliation in calendar year 2021 when that fiscal year turns over. So if you think back to President Trump, think back to 2017. So this is actually right around the time in 2017 that Republicans were voting on repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act. Republicans were attempting to use budget reconciliation to do that. They could have done it without any Democratic support. But remember, Senators Murkowski, Senator Collins, and Senator McCain all voted against that. So that was that was Republicans' first attempt in 2017 to use budget reconciliation. And then remember at the end of the year, when it was fiscal year 2018, but calendar year 2017, in December of 2017, Republicans passed the American Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was also using budget reconciliation. So again, it's not unheard of to use budget reconciliation twice in the same calendar year when you have that fiscal year change, but this would be Democrats potentially using budget reconciliation 3 times in the 2021 calendar year. So again, a lot of again, the dynamics and some of it is certainly complex, but it's important to realize with this extra budget reconciliation opportunity, Democrats are going to try to pass something this summer through budget reconciliation that likely all are part of the infrastructure package. And then they would have another opportunity potentially at the end of the year to once again use the budget reconciliation process. So Dara, I don't know if there are any questions on that section before we get into the meat of infrastructure and other things, but love to take any if there are.
Sure, I do have one. I have to tell you, I did not count how many times you used the phrase budget reconciliation, but it makes sense that, we have a question for you in that area. With Democrats focusing so much in this space, does that mean we're going to see the pace of executive orders slow down?
Yeah, so I think next time we're going to do a bingo card. We'll have budget reconciliation, infrastructure, Senate parliamentarian, and we'll see who wins that. Yeah, it's a fair question. Certainly you look at this map, and again, Democrats have mapped out a strategy where if they're unable to get Republicans to support what they want to do, they feel like they have opportunities to use budget reconciliation multiple times. How does that affect executive orders? It's hard to say. Remember, budget reconciliation is limited. And again, you have to have items that directly impact federal revenue. And so what we're seeing the president do right now, it's not unlike what President Trump did, to be frank. President Biden is focused on undoing a number of President Trump's executive orders. And I think this number it might be a little off, but President Biden issued maybe 15 executive orders in his first 2 days. It was in a tremendous amount of executive orders in a very short period of time. And you've seen the president even recently, I think this week, he has signed an executive order that increases minimum wage for federal contractors to $15. So he's trying to use the executive orders in places where maybe there's something that can't go through budget reconciliation and he feels like he has that executive power. I do think you're going to see it slow. And that's just sort of the natural ebb and flow of things. Could we see some executive orders on immigration, things that are outside of the employee benefits world? I think absolutely. So I do think we will see executive orders slow. But, President Trump, if you look at how he used executive orders, he was pretty steady throughout his term, issuing, 40-ish or so every single year. So we'll have to see. But yeah, it does feel like Democrats are trying to legislate a little bit more, and we will see those pace of executive orders slow. So executive orders, those would also go on the bingo card when we do this next time. All right. So Dara, any other questions? Or I'm going to go into. You said one question. I'm going to hold you to that. I'll come back to you. Oh, you got another one. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So one more, a little more general in nature. What's happened to drug pricing initiatives? There seemed to be a lot of momentum with the last Congress, but that slowed. Why is that? And I guess the second part of the question is, do you see the Biden administration picking up where the Trump administration left off?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Good segue into the next section. For sure. Drug pricing certainly. Again, if you listen to the president's speech last night, his joint address, he talked about drug pricing, talked about America has the highest prescription drug prices in the world. Asked his former colleagues in the Senate in particular to really take a look at this issue. That said, when you look at the American Rescue Plan, when you look at the American Jobs Act proposal, when you look at the American Families Plan proposal, there is not significant drug pricing initiatives in there. And I thought what was interesting last night is you may have heard the president talk about allowing Medicare to negotiate with prescription drug companies, and yet, and this is just sort of interesting, that is not anywhere in any of those proposals that he has put forward. So it seems like, at least at this point, at least maybe for the first part of his term, the focus has been on COVID relief, which we'll talk about in a moment. And actually, maybe we'll go here. The first part of the president's initiatives were the American Rescue Plan. We'll get into the details in a moment. Now he's moving into this infrastructure arrangement. And maybe it's that third part. Maybe when we get towards the end of the year, once we get through infrastructure, then maybe drug pricing comes back. But it's a fair point. It is something also that is always talked about in DC, but it's very, very hard to move forward. But good point. I think I'll weave that into into this year. But again, to move on to the agenda, but thank you, Duran. Keep those questions coming. That's great. Keeps me on my toes, that's for sure. When we think about what the president has done so far, the American Rescue Plan, again, budget reconciliation, no Republican support here. We had the recovery rebates, we had that extended unemployment insurance, and certainly all of you on the phone are dealing with the COBRA subsidies, which are really unprecedented. Not unprecedented that of course, we've had COBRA subsidies in the past 2 other times, back in 2002 and in 2009, during both of those economic downturns. You saw 65% COBRA subsidies. To have 100% COBRA subsidy, that's I think it's controversial to say that's pretty rich. Those are through the end of September. And I'm just a lobbyist. I'm not an employment attorney. As you know, the Department of Labor, IRS issuing guidance, have issued guidance, still need to issue a little bit more. It's a lot of responsibility for employers to notify their employees that have, or their former employees, that they're now eligible for these subsidies. And certainly, as you folks know better than myself, because of all the COBRA rules and COVID, it's not just 60 days that you're eligible to elect your COBRA coverage. It's really complex, but you generally have a year-ish. I know, there's a bunch of different rules around that. But also remember, with this subsidy, it's unique in that if I was laid off on December 1st, and now it's April, what's today? April 29th. I could decide that I'm going to elect COBRA coverage as of April 1st so that I'm getting that full 100% subsidy. And I'm not going to have to elect as of the first day I was eligible, and I'm not going to have to pay back premiums. I can just slip right in to April 1st, have the government cover me through April 30th with that 100% subsidy. Now, again, it's not, some people are saying it's free insurance. We can argue about that. The premiums are free, certainly. And free is probably not, we're all paying taxes and all that stuff. So let me take that back. The government's paying for the premiums, but other out-of-pocket costs certainly, still are the responsibility of the patients. But what I'll be interested to see, and I haven't heard this yet from anyone, I think the hope by everyone, Democrats, Republicans, independents, is by the end of September, hopefully the economy's continuing to grow. Vaccines are out there. I get my second vaccine May 11th. Very excited about that. Team Pfizer would have taken anything, but they gave me Pfizer. A little nervous about the second. I hear you get some side effects. Well worth it though. But sorry, getting off track. But by September, hopefully vaccine distribution, people want the vaccines, have got them. Things are getting back to normal. So the hope is this is not going to be extended. I haven't heard any conversations yet about extending these COBRA subsidies, but certainly something that we're watching. And then the FFCRA paid leave tax credits extended for the businesses for under 500 employees. The options there, there's no longer that mandate. The option for you to continue to provide that is there. And of course, there's some extended reasons there. So, that's the past though. And, let's looking to the future. The American Jobs Plan. This is what the president talked about last night. The American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. And there are significant, whether you're a broker, a consultant, an HR expert, a business owner, a CFO, this is a big deal for a lot of different reasons. So the jobs plan itself, more traditional, we could argue this a little bit, but your more traditional infrastructure, but certainly with an extended definition of traditional things like roads, bridges, airports, rail, broadband. Broadband has now become part of traditional infrastructure, right or wrong. When you talk about traditional infrastructure, broadband, an expansion of broadband is in there as well for Democrats and Republicans. But the American Jobs Plan also has things for childcare, long-term care care workers in general, beefing up those industries that certainly were hit hard by COVID. So the American Jobs Plan is a infrastructure proposal that stretches the traditional infrastructure definition. It's a $2 trillion plan. And as the president pointed out last night, he said he's open to negotiating on this. Republicans have put forward a $600 billion truly traditional infrastructure plan. The hard infrastructure, traditional bridges, roads, airports. The president says he's open to negotiating. We'll have to see where that moves forward. But one thing to keep in mind, and this is certainly, I'd say, a little bit under the radar, not some that members of Congress, some are excited to talk about, others not so much. Don't forget that the return of earmarks is going to have an impact. Now, if you're a member of Congress or your congressional staff, you don't like the term earmarks, you like the term congressional directed spending. And so if you think back to pre-2011, because that's really when earmarks went away, pre-2011, if you had an infrastructure bill, let's say you had a district and you had a bridge that was that needed repair, or you had a regional airport that really, needed some expansion, you could put a line item, an appropriations line item that said $5 million for XYZ regional airport in Westwood, Massachusetts, where I live. And then if that bill passed, your district would get that $5 million allocated for that specific regional airport. Well, in 2011, when Republicans took control of the House, they decided earmarks were getting a little squishy, and maybe, there was ethical concerns about earmarks. And so the earmark process went away. Well, Democrats have decided now, and again, this isn't a Democratic or Republican thing. This is just, what's happening. Democrats control the House and the Senate. Democrats in the House in particular have decided that congressional directed spending is going to come back, and members will be able to submit earmarks. Republicans are wary but willing to participate in this. Some Republicans have said we're not going to do earmarks. Some Democrats have said we're not going to do earmarks. But the majority of Democrats and Republicans are interested in earmarks. And by the way, there's a very good argument for why earmarks make sense. So when earmarks went away, instead of saying $5 million goes to this bridge in this city or town, the appropriation spending would say, I'm making this up, but $100 billion to repair bridges and railroads across the country. And then it was up to the White House and the Secretary of Interior, the Secretary of Transportation to dole out how to pay out that $100 million. So the power went from Congress to the White House to control where that money was spent. So the argument for members of Congress that like congressional directed spending or earmarks is that Congress should be deciding where the money is spent directly. The other side of why earmarks is helpful from a bipartisan standpoint is, let's say that I'm a Republican and I'm a member of Congress and I don't love everything that's in this particular infrastructure package. However, I was able to secure $3 million for the regional airport that's in my town, and $5 million to repair XYZ highway, and $2 million for a new senior center in my town or in my district. Maybe I'm a little more committed to the appropriations process and trying to get this bill over the finish line because I know specifically how it's going to impact my district. Now, listen, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just telling you how it is. And so congressional directed spending is back, and that is going to have an impact. That is going to have an impact on the appropriations process. Now, the bigger part, and now that's kind of just the high level, what are things happening. Everyone on this call needs to be concerned about increased corporate tax rates. Now, you may be in favor of increased corporate tax rates, you might be against it, but you have to be aware that the Biden administration, as they said last night, they're looking to pay for this infrastructure package by two ways: corporate tax increases and individual tax increases on the wealthiest Americans. We're going to talk about those increases in a moment. On the corporate side of things, the corporate rate would go from 21 to 28%. For those of you that work for or advise multinational companies, those companies are going to come under a microscope a little bit more again. You could argue, and I certainly offline, I can talk to you for hours about the base erosion tax and GILTI and how the 2017 tax cuts for corporations, yes, the rate was lowered, but for multinational companies, there was a lot more scrutiny put on how they're structured. President Biden would like to continue to increase that scrutiny for multinational companies and really make sure that, as he mentioned last night in his speech, companies aren't moving money in places they shouldn't to avoid taxation. And then the third thing, and the president mentioned this last night again, and well, I'll say this, there's a more left-leaning think tank that has identified 55 companies, public companies in the US, that paid a net zero federal income taxes in 2019. And that's what President Biden was referring to last night, saying, some corporations that don't pay federal income taxes. What the Biden plan would do is it would look at, and I'm not an accountant, so I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here, but there's different ways that you can account for income, and maybe you account one way under accounting standards and one way how you're reporting your numbers to the street. Essentially, what the Biden plan is saying is they would look at the numbers that are being reported to investors, and tax a minimum tax amount on that, likely a 15% minimum tax on that number. So the thought process is, and this is also a little controversial, the corporate tax proposals that the Biden administration is proposing over a 15-year period would pay for the $2 trillion of infrastructure spending. So when you think about it from a political dynamic, Republicans, generally speaking, and they've talked about this quite a bit, are not interested in raising corporate tax rates, particularly they would argue towards the end of a pandemic, why would we try to upset the economy when it's at a very fragile state? But President Biden, as he said last night, wants to pay for that, and that's his pay for this. We'll talk about some other dynamics in a minute. But the second half, and this is what President Biden spent a lot of time on yesterday as well, is the families plan. Now, this is being referred to as either care infrastructure or human infrastructure. So, certainly this doesn't meet the definition of traditional infrastructure, but the Biden administration is arguing that this also needs to be rebuilt. And so this is where we're talking about the permanent paid family and medical leave program, federal. We're going to spend a whole slide on that in a minute, so we'll come back to that. But the 2 years of free preschool, the 2 years of community college, capping the amount of childcare costs for low and middle income families, and also increasing in the American Rescue Plan, there was increases to the child tax credit, increases to the dependent care tax credit. Both of those would be made permanent. So again, this is about $2 trillion as well. So the entire infrastructure package, when you take the traditional or hard infrastructure plus the human or care infrastructure, that's about $4 trillion of spending. But again, the president's proposing that the human infrastructure would also be paid for by individual tax increases. And if you look at the plan that the president put out, it's very specific. The tax increases are targeted at the absolute wealthiest Americans. So there'd be an increase for the top marginal tax rate. So today, the top marginal rate is 37%. And so for every dollar today, right now, for every dollar, I'm married, have kids, and I don't make $622,000, but maybe someday. But for every dollar if I ever made more than $622,000, today that's taxed at 37%. Well, what the president is saying is going forward, anyone who makes, for every dollar you make over $622,000 a year, or and change, you'd pay 39.6%, which is a return to what the highest rate was for former presidents. And he referenced yesterday, of course, this is where the Bush tax cuts many years ago put that top tax rate at. That actually probably isn't, maybe that seems controversial. That's probably the least controversial part of the tax plan. Maybe the most controversial part in particularly with the economic recovery is the increase in capital gains rates. So the Biden plan would say, if you make over $1 million, and when I say when you make, by the way, that's generally going to be your adjusted gross income figure. So, some of your deductions come out, but not all. So it's an adjusted gross income figure. If you're over $1 million on that adjusted gross income, your capital gain rates today are 20%. They would increase to 39.6%. So your capital gain rates and your investment returns would be taxed the same. Remember, capital gains, you have to hold certain investments for over a year to be eligible for capital. That's a long-term capital gain rate is essentially what it is. If you bought a stock for $100, you sell it for $300, you have $200 of capital gains. If you held that stock for longer than a year during that appreciation, the $200 today is taxed at 20%. Under this proposal, would be taxed at 39.6%. Actually would be, and you might see this number even higher. And the reason for that is you have to remember that if under the Affordable Care Act, there's an additional 3.8% excise tax that individuals over $250,000 a year pay on their investment income. So you'll also see this as, I didn't have it written down, so it's going to be tough math for me, as 42.4%. It's a 42.4% capital gain rate. And then, of course, depending on what state you live in, state taxes as well. So, you've seen articles on CNBC, the Wall Street Journal, talk about, for someone living in California, let's say, they could be looking at a, 50% top capital gains rate or 50% top rate. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just, telling you how it is. But the Biden administration feels very strongly that the wealthiest Americans should pay that. Again, I'm just reading the news here, just from the reporter. And then the other big revenue raiser would be, we've heard a lot about changing the estate tax. And you might have noticed there is no changes to the estate tax under the Biden plan. But what there is, or estate tax directly, what there is though, is the step up in basis rule would be limited to $1 million. Now, what the heck does that mean? So let's say my parents bought a stock for $100,000 And when they pass away, the stock's worth $1 million. It's just had incredible growth, $900,000 worth of growth. When they pass away and I'm going to inherit that stock. When I inherit that stock, the cost basis for me is going to be $1 million. That $900,000 of gain gets wiped away at death. And stepped up. It's called a step up basis. So now my parents bought it for $100,000. It's worth $1 million. They die. I get it. It's worth $1 million. I could sell it tomorrow. I owe no capital gains. If my parents had sold it, they would have had to pay capital gains on the $900,000 called step up in basis. I'm not arguing the good or bad. That just, it is what it is. It's unlimited step up in basis. What the Biden administration is saying is that at death, each individual has $1 million step up in basis. And again, the argument for this is small family farms are affected potentially by the estate tax. The step up in basis is not going to have an immediate taxable ramification for anyone. And so by limiting this will raise revenue. It sort of limits arguably, I'm not saying arguably, but some Democrats would argue levels the playing field. And again, that appreciation that doesn't get taxed at death, it gets wiped away. That would be in here. There are some other things as well that are in there. Some things around real estate transactions. Some of the income that hedge fund managers make would no longer be taxed at something called carried interest. Would no longer, not just hedge fund managers, but other investment managers as well, would no longer be taxed at capital gain rates. But again, the target for this is all the wealthiest Americans. Again, please don't mistake me. My job here is to report the news. I'm not saying this is the right path or the wrong path, but this is what President Biden is saying. We're going to create this human infrastructure that's going to apply broadly, and the pay for is going to be these increased tax increases. So I'm going to talk about paid family and medical leave a little bit more in depth. The fact is, right now there's really three constituencies on paid family and medical leave. There's the PFML advocates, the paid family and medical leave advocates. These are the folks like Paid Leave in the US, you might have heard of them, plus the National Partnership for Women and Family. These are organizations that their primary purpose is to advocate for policy initiatives and that will benefit primarily lower income women and families. That's their whole goal. And so they see paid family medical leave. Right now, about 20% of American workers have access to a true paid family and medical leave program. But 40% have short-term disability, but true paid family and medical leave, the caregiving leave, the bonding leave, care for your own medical condition, all those three wrapped into one, about a quarter of workers. And so the advocates have been pushing forever to have a national paid family and medical leave program. And they view this as their best opportunity. House, Senate, President, all Democratic. And again, the president proposing this. The other constituency, and this is a new one, and many of you have heard me speak before. This is a relatively new one. It's the business community, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable. You've heard me use these names before. Very powerful advocacy organizations in D.C., U.S. Chamber, nor the Business Roundtable, particularly the Chamber, certainly not progressive organizations. Their members are saying, hey, listen, we have businesses that operate in multiple states. Today, there's 9 states plus DC. There's 10 programs that exist. Now, not all of them are in effect yet. Oregon, Colorado, Connecticut, those 3 are still coming. But there's programs that are in effect today in 10 different places. This is getting hard for us as multi-state employers. And so what they've instructed their advocacy groups to do is, again, the business community, is to go to members of Congress, Democrats or Republicans, and say, hey, we can deal with one federal program if you get rid of the 10 state programs, the 9 programs plus DC. And so this is a big shift. We talked about this, and when we've talked about this in the past, we've said paid family medical leave is gaining momentum. This is a big reason. The national business organizations are saying 10 programs is too many, give us just one. So what the business community wants is one federal program that preempts all the state programs, just gets rid of them. Now, again, that's what they want. Doesn't look like that's what they're going to get, but that's what they've been advocating for. And then there's the insurers. And we're sitting here and we're saying, hey, wait a minute. We work with businesses all over the country, large and small. We provide 40% of American workers with short-term disability that their employers or employees are voluntarily paying for without any government intervention. Let's work together, because we could be the foundation to make sure maybe more Americans can can get covered. And so these three constituencies, what's come together, the proposal that the president released, I'd keep an eye on it, but the proposal I'd really watch is the one that Chairman Neal came out with earlier this week from the Ways and Means Committee. And this proposal would create a national 12-week paid family and medical leave program. There'd be three options of how you could get the benefits. Option number one is you get them through a government program run through the U.S. Department of Treasury. The second place you could get benefits is if you live in a state or DC that has a state program, you would get the benefits through the state program. Option number three is if you're an employer that's providing a 12-week true paid family and medical leave program, caregiving for for paid medical for your own serious health condition, caregiving for someone else, bonding with a new child. If you offer a true PFML program to your employees, you can keep providing that to your employees. And if you do, the government will reimburse you 40% of the claims of your claim costs. Also, under this proposal, if you want to work with an insurer like Sun Life, God knows all we do, 90% of my time is spent on paid family and medical leave. We have invested to be able to offer programs in all the different states. If you want to work with an insurer to build your paid family and medical leave program, you can buy insurance from the insurer. And when the insurer pays the claim to your employee, you still will receive the 40% reimbursement. Now, the reason why I'm paying so much attention to this particular proposal, and obviously there's 1,000 details I'm not getting to at the moment, is this comes from Chairman Richie Neal. Chairman Neal is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. The Ways and Means Committee has direct jurisdiction over paid family and medical leave and taxes. And it's not a mistake that this program was released on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the president released his program. Chairman Neal got in front of the president's program, which is not nearly as detailed as this. And so this is really what we're paying attention to. And, in some ways, there's some flexibility here. Again, you have three places to get the leave: government program, state program, or build it yourself. But if you're in a state that does not have paid family and medical leave right now, if you're a client that's if you're a HR, if you're someone who runs HR for a company on the phone, if you're a CFO, if you're a business owner, you need to talk to your consultant, to your broker about paid family and medical leave and what this would do, because I think there's a 50% chance or better that there is going to be a paid family medical leave benefit that's part of this infrastructure package that's going to go through. So, I can't underscore this enough. I don't want to take, too much time, and certainly, we can answer more specific questions on this, but the advocates are looking at this as this is their moment. It's going to be really hard for the Democrats to hold the House and the Senate in the 2022 cycle. You have a president that's talking about paid family medical leave in his conversation. And by the way, it's not fair to say this is a Democratic issue. Under President Trump, all federal employees were given 12 weeks of parental leave, 100% paid parental leave. Under President Trump, there was a tax credit that was put into effect that if you provide paid family and medical leave to your lower wage workers, your workers that make less than $72,000, it's probably not low wage, but that's how it's characterized. Employees that make less than $72,000 a year, part of that PFML can be reimbursed. So this is not a Democratic or Republican issue. It's just for a national program of this scope. The advocacy community really feels like this is their best shot. And again, they have some momentum, but this Ways and Means proposal, if you want to, and we can certainly find a way to send this to you, but just Google discussion draft, Building an Economy for Families Act. They did a great job. The Ways and Means Committee is fantastic. They did a great job, breaks down the whole thing. The Building an Economy for Families Act is the Ways and Means proposal. Just Google Ways and Means PFML proposal and the details, or send us questions, and we're certainly happy to answer those. All right, so Dara, what do we got? What do we got here? I'm running a little hot here, but let's take some questions, and I'll go quick on the 2022 part.
All right, let's see if we can stump you here. You spoke to paid family. You spoke to paid family and medical leave. There's a lot of details, as you mentioned, right? That are going to come out of that. Do you imagine there'd be exemptions for small employers, or would every employer need to comply with that?
So I hate when lobbyists say this, but it does make you sound so important. So I was on a call with the White House today, true story, not with Biden, but with staff, to talk about paid family and medical leave. And this question came up, believe it or not. And the way the Biden administration is hoping a national program comes forward is that it goes down to self-employed and gig workers, and that every single American worker is eligible for this. So now that said, what they didn't address on that call is, that could be potentially burdensome, for some smaller employers. And if you think back to the FFCRA, paid sick and paid emergency paid family leave, when the mandate was there, if you had less than 50 employees, you could decide not to do it. You had the option between 50 and 500, you had to. Under 50, you didn't. So, we'll see. Everything's a moving target. I think the advocacy community would trade a national paid family medical leave program that may be applied to, FMLA covered workers as opposed to nothing. But the goal, and again, this is straight from, National Economic Council staff today. The goal is to have every single worker covered. That could be a bridge too far, for some Democrats, for some moderates. But at this point, all the plans that are out there, the Ways and Means plan, the President plan, they would have every worker down to self-employed would be eligible for this and would be included in as part of it. But it's a great important question and a good one.
All right, that was a bit of a softball. So when it comes to the infrastructure and tax proposals that you reviewed, do you see them as coming through in one large bill, or will there be multiple pieces of legislation passed in order to get some of those through?
I don't know. That's another tough one. There's really two paths. Path number one, and the president talked about this. Path number one is Democrats or Republicans come together on a hard infrastructure package, traditional infrastructure, airports, bridges, those things, highways. And there's a $600 to $900 billion, maybe even $1 trillion infrastructure package that's passed with Democratic and Republican support. Now, if that's going to happen, though, Democrats are going to have to say they're willing to finance it. And so are Republicans, because Republicans are not going to be on board for corporate tax increases to finance that. But that could be step one. You do infrastructure, hard infrastructure, bipartisan, and then Democrats try to use budget reconciliation. We haven't used it in a while. Budget reconciliation to pass everything else. So there's political pros and cons to that for both sides. On the Democratic side of things, that's not bad to run on in 2022, saying, hey, listen, we worked with Republicans and we got as much infrastructure as we could get through, but then they weren't working with us on the other stuff. And so we had to go on it on our own. Same thing for Republicans. They could say, listen, when Democrats are reasonable, we're willing to work with them on bipartisan things, but then, when they want to do all these other things, we're not going to be reasonable for them. So there are political ways to frame that for 2022. The other option, though, is Democrats try to just push as much through budget reconciliation as they can. And if they do that, they have to be looking at, and this is actually a good segue to the next section. They have to be thinking that 2022 is going to be difficult for them. And by the way, it is not political. 2022 is going to be hard for the Democrats. And the reason for that is this chart. Some of you have seen this chart before. It's my favorite chart. I need to make it more exciting because this is literally my favorite chart. This goes back to President Reagan, and it looks at the first midterm that you had in your first year in office. So in your first term in office. So President Reagan, his first midterm, those November 82 midterms, Republicans gain 1 seat in the Senate, but they lose 26 seats in the House. And you can see that trend generally continues. George W. is an outlier there. It's first midterm after 9/11. So maybe that is, we have to factor that in. Generally speaking, you're going to lose seats. Your party, if you're the president, your party is going to lose seats in the House and the Senate in that first midterm. It's just what the trends show us. So if you're the Democrats, you're sitting there with right now a 6-seat majority in the House. And in the Senate, you have no majority. It's 50-50. And you look at this chart and you think back to President Obama. After President Obama passes the Affordable Care Act, Democrats lose 63 seats in the House. That's a lot of seats. President Trump's first term, Republicans lose 41 seats in the House. So forget about the Senate for a minute. Just on focusing on the House, you see the much bigger swings in the House. And that's a lot more districts, a lot more micro, a lot more politics is local. So when we think about the infrastructure package, again, if Democrats feel like, hey, history shows us we're probably going to lose the 2022, we're probably going to lose the House in the 2022 midterms, we better do as much as we can through budget reconciliation while we still have the power, because who knows where things are going to go in 2024, 2026, and 2028. So, again, that's the number, that's the every single call I'm on with my counterparts from other companies, other lobbyists. When I'm talking to lobbyists from other industries, when I'm talking to, professional lobbyists that, consultants and things like that, that's the number one question. No one quite knows, but this chart I think is important, to reflect on, because again, it's really hard to hold especially when you control the whole government, when you have the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office. It's going to be really hard for your party to control things. And that certainly is weighing on leadership's mind. And again, might push the Democrats a little bit more, towards that budget reconciliation for as much as possible. So, with that, I'm going to just, I'll close up and then, Darath, happy to take whatever other questions came in. I think, President Biden's finding out what every president finds out. Campaigning super easy. That's not easy, but it's fun. You can go out there, say whatever you want. Governing's hard. Even when you control all three chambers, when the majorities are so slim, very, very difficult. Infrastructure. Hard infrastructure paid for by corporate tax rates. Human infrastructure paid for by individual increases on the wealthiest Americans. Federal paid family and medical leave. This is, for those of you who have seen me speak, or Marge Robertson, Abby O'Connell, for years, we've been trying to raise the alarm bells on a federal paid family medical leave program. This is not an exercise. This is not a drill. This is the closest we're going to know in the next 90 to 120 days if we're going to have it, and we have to be prepared. It's something, definitely want to be talking to if you're a broker consultant listening to this, you want to talk to your clients. If you're running an HR department, if you're a business owner, CFO, you want to be talking to your broker consultant about it. And again, midterms, just 558 days away, but certainly overshadowing things. So Darath, what else we got? We got a few more minutes here. My contact information's there. Trying to get some more LinkedIn followers too. So if you want to not hating you, if you want to, join me on LinkedIn and connect, I put a lot of stuff out there too. But Darath, what do we got? Lightning.
I'm going to come to you with something that we haven't really touched on here. Single payer, right? Like one of our favorite topics here in this industry. Have we heard anything about single payer proposals? Any traction in the House or the Senate? And what would it mean for us in this industry?
Well, it will be not entirely great, probably, for our industry. I think a lot of us are very invested in the employer-based healthcare system. Sun Life, largest independent stop-loss provider, we're very invested. For all of us, most of our jobs revolve around the benefits industry. I think, this is something that, again, fun to, if you're on the campaign trail, fun to talk about, great to talk about on Twitter, really hard when you look at the policy, and really hard when you look at, there are certainly progressive Democrats and very popular progressive Democrats. But there are a lot of moderate Democrats, and there are a lot of Democrats that understand, how complicated the Affordable Care Act was. And a single payer system would be, mountains 100 times more complicated than that. I think, instead of single payer, what's more likely would be once we get through infrastructure and we get to the end of the year, things like lowering the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 60, many of you have heard me talk about that before. That could be accomplished through budget reconciliation, by the way. So that, so then obviously not infrastructure, but maybe towards the end of the year. But I think that's the direction. And just maybe you could say we're taking baby steps, towards single payer, with Medicare eligibility and things like that being lowered. But you've heard some Democrats talk about 50 or 55 Medicare eligibility age. I think the lowest you could actually get to in this Congress or during the Biden administration is 60. But yeah, so single payer, still floating around. Certainly we always want to keep an eye on. But again, in terms of, it's great to talk about on Twitter, great to talk about. If you're on certain, more progressive leaning talk shows, but the reality is there's not an appetite in Congress for it at the moment.
Great, thanks. And in terms of the House seats being redistributed, what's your best estimate of what might happen there?
Apportionment day. What was that? Last week? That was a big day. Or was it this week? I think, from a Democratic standpoint, probably turned out a little better than they thought. New York was, maybe going to lose a couple more than they did. Rhode Island keeps their congressional seat. Texas picks up a couple. Florida. I think, what to really watch here is going to be how redistricting works. And, gerrymandering on both sides of the aisle, depending on who controls that. But I think generally speaking, didn't work out great for the Democrats, but could have been worse. I think is sort of the headline there. But again, I don't mean for this to be political. The headwinds are there for the Democrats to hold the House in 2022. Just again, that chart that I showed you, my favorite chart, reapportionment of seats, leaned a little more towards the Republicans. So I think it's going to be difficult. That certainly, again, could have gone worse with Democrats, but I think that ended up better for Republicans and Democrats. We only have 4 minutes left here, so this is which is good. I'm exhausted, but let's keep them coming.
So we have a number of other questions here, but I think I'm going to exercise my right to ask my own. So obviously you have a lot of energy, a lot of knowledge in this space, and you shared a lot, you shared a lot of information. What would you suggest as the most important takeaway of everything you shared today?
Throughout, they call that in Congress is and I think the president said this, a point of personal privilege to ask your own question, which I think is fair. Paid family medical leave. And again, I think, if you've been listening to Sun Life over the last couple of years, again, Marge, Abby, myself, others, Jonathan Kemp, we've been banging this drum and we know it's been coming. We have made huge investments at Sun Life to prepare for a federal paid family and medical leave program. Other insurers have too. I think the industry is ready and is prepared to help the transition from short-term disability to paid family and medical leave. I mean, paid medical leave is essentially short-term disability. There's obviously some differences there. But the takeaway is, if I'm in a state that doesn't have a paid family medical leave program, would I be ready if on January 1st, 2023, now that's what some of the proposals are saying when this would kick in. Am I ready for my workforce to be provided with, regardless of the size, potentially job protected paid leave? Now, the job protection, they're still trying to work out some of those details, but it's paid family and medical leave, having a conversation with your consultant about that. And then number two, it's taxes. Whatever size business you are, you could see your taxes go back to something similar to what they were in 2017. Maybe not as high. If you're working for a multinational or you're advising multinational, the folks like me that work at there trust me, they're all over the Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance Committee. But tax increases, how that's going to affect your bottom line, potentially paid family and medical leave, a federal program that would impact everyone in the country, again, down to self-employed individuals. So I guess I took a point of personal privilege. Two things: the tax increases, and then paid family and medical leave.
Great, thanks. And we're just about at the top of the hour, so I don't think we have time for additional questions, but James opened it up for LinkedIn connections, and you can get your questions to him in many different ways.
Yeah, Dara, if I could just say, first of all, thank you for sorting through the questions and putting up with me, which is always the hardest part of the presentation. Thanks to everyone that tuned in. We're certainly laser focused on this infrastructure package, where it's going to go. I'll have a lot more stuff on LinkedIn over the next few months. Feel free to email me any questions. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. We'll put all this information on the website. As you know, your Sun Life sales reps, whether it's stop loss, group, your EBR, your voluntary rep, we're all here. We want to be as helpful as possible. It's been a crazy year. We had a great year, thanks to all of you. And, we certainly appreciate the partnership, and we look forward to doing many more of these in the future. But Dara, I don't know if you have anything to close, but I'll turn it over to you to finish things off.
No, I would just say be on the lookout. You should be presented with a brief survey. If you could complete that for us, it would be great. It'll help us shape our future webinars, and be on the lookout for future webinars as well. We'd love to have you back.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.